So welcome to us all joining in the WWF Pavilion and to those online today. We have a 1-hour session. We will do this. Indigenous people leading climate resilience and nature preservation. We have some esteemed panelists with us today who will share their insights and perspectives on how Indigenous practices can contribute to climate resilience and climate targets, nature preservation, and how Indigenous people can proactively participate in climate change mitigation actions. My name is Tracy Liu, and I will be your moderator for the next 60 minutes. I am an initiative lead of the governance practice of WWF International, based in the Toronto office of WWF Canada, which is located on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. I coordinate a global project called People Protecting Landscapes and Seascapes, which supports and strengthens Indigenous peoples and locally led activities in 15 WWF countries around the world. So I'd like to introduce the speakers that we have with us today. We have Katie Higginson, who is the Political Economic Counselor at the British Embassy of Myanmar. She is online with us today. Welcome. We also have Teddy Bagulat, who is the president of the ICCA Consortium, and he's attending today as a representative of Tuvalu and Nueva Vizcaya from the Philippines. We also have with us today Tale Silibarave, who is a representative of the Thahimawe Youth and Women's Group of Kaveva Island on Fiji's Great Sea Reef. We also have with us today Hang Dal, who is from WWF Myanmar. He is representing two of our Myanmar speakers who will join us in a little bit of time. There are some challenges in the venue today, so welcome to you all. So I would like to mention that we look forward to hearing our speakers as they share their experiences related to mitigation and adaptation actions. As Indigenous peoples play an important role from across the Asia-Pacific region. And as local level actors, they play a very important role in implementing the Paris Agreement. And this is something essential that should not be overlooked. We look forward to hearing your insights on how subnational climate change targets can also ensure effective participation of Indigenous peoples and non-state actors. So just as information about the flow of the event today, we'll first hear welcoming remarks from Katie, and secondly, we'll hear some opening remarks from Teddy. Then we'll have 2 rounds of questions, and if there are questions from our audience, including our online audience, we can take those at the end. So I'd like to welcome our audience here in person and also online. And just to mention for those joining via Zoom, please do feed your questions to my colleague, and I will be able to access them using my phone on the Q&A function. For those interested parties that could not join in person today, we do appreciate that you have tuned in to join us online, both during and after the event. And also, one last housekeeping note. Due to the challenging operating context of Myanmar right now, and to best ensure the safety of our speakers returning to Myanmar, we would ask that there would be no reference to the political context of the country in this session. Our audience, both online and in person, are asked to bear this in mind when asking questions or making comments. So with that, I'd like to hand over the floor to Katie to provide some welcoming remarks. Katie, you have the floor.
Thank you. Well, good morning. My name is Katie Higginson, Political and Economic Counsellor at the UK Embassy here in Myanmar. And I'd like to start by thanking WWF for organising this important event. I'm really pleased to be joining from Yangon and delighted to see Myanmar panellists on the stage in Dubai. As you'll understand, our primary focus as the UK and Myanmar is to support the efforts of the people here to resolve the political crisis and their aspirations for an inclusive federal democracy, and to stand by the people of Myanmar at this time of suffering and crisis. However, I wanted to take the opportunity of this meeting to say that we also can't forget the long-term importance of climate change for Myanmar. So if we look at the region, the Asian Pacific region is home to 13 of the 30 countries in the world most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. The region is uniquely sensitive due to long coastlines, growing economic activities, abundant low-lying areas, large island populations, income disparities, and the importance of agriculture. Without action, by 2030, an estimated 7.5 million people in the region could fall into poverty due to the impacts of climate change. This is on top of the loss of livelihoods, damage to cities and dwellings, environmental degradation, impacting agricultural activities, and other health-related issues. In 2020 alone, 21.3 million people in the region were displaced due to the impacts of climate change and natural disasters. And the impacts are disproportionately felt among populations with women, those engaged in agriculture, and low-income households. Indigenous communities are some of the most vulnerable. The Asia Pacific is home to more than 150 million Indigenous people who have ancestral ties to their land and are dependent on it for their livelihoods and basic resources. Therefore, while they are at high risk of the effects of climate change, they can also be part of the solution. The UK is proud to support initiatives aimed at fostering the inclusion of Indigenous communities in designing policy and developing activities that mitigate against the impacts of climate change. We have close ties with WWF in many areas of this world with the common goal of mitigating the effects of climate change. And I understand the work that WWF are doing with Indigenous people was born following the signing of the Paris Agreement by 195 countries in 2015. Nationally determined contributions, NDCs, are at the heart of the Paris Agreement, under which every participating country is required to prepare, communicate, and maintain successive NDCs that it intends to achieve. These are essentially the efforts by each country to reduce national emissions and adapt to the impacts of climate change. Each country's NDC takes into account its domestic circumstances and capabilities, reflecting its contribution to the global effort to limit global warming. However, many NDCs are developed at the national level and do not take into account the needs, rights, and actions of Indigenous communities, communities who are disproportionately affected by climate change. Indigenous communities in the Asia Pacific hold a wealth of traditional knowledge and practices that are crucial for sustainable environmental management. Emphasising the importance of this knowledge, we see that their practices, honed over centuries, offer unique insights and solutions to climate-related challenges, particularly in areas like biodiversity conservation and natural resource management. By working with Indigenous communities in a bottom-up way and ensuring their role at the forefront of climate change mitigation strategy, these communities can be empowered to lead the fight against climate change. For example, by supporting the role of Indigenous communities in developing NDCs, equitable and inclusive policy can be designed that safeguards livelihoods, access to resources, and community rights. I would like to reiterate the importance of a concerted effort to integrate the voices and needs of Indigenous communities in the development and implementation of climate policies, particularly NDCs under the Paris Agreement. Finally, continued advocacy from organisations such as WWF and partner organisations for policies that not only recognise the rights of Indigenous peoples, but actively empower them to lead and contribute to climate change mitigation and adaptation efforts remains extremely important. This includes supporting their participation in decision-making processes and ensuring equitable access to resources and benefits. What we'll hear today is how Indigenous peoples and local communities across the region are determined to set ambitious targets and to contribute towards climate mitigation and adaptation actions. We will also hear how best we can support them to do this. I'm sure the panel today will generate a range of exciting and interesting ideas and suggestions for ways in which the international community can support people in the region to respond to the challenge of climate change. Thank you very much to you all, and I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you very much, Katie, for your reflections. It's very interesting to hear of the UK support and interest in this area, particularly in highlighting the vulnerability of the region, the vulnerability including of women, and also your reflections on the importance of Indigenous knowledge and the role that they can play in policy and decision-making processes, including in nationally determined contributions, biodiversity, and nature. So thank you for that inspiring call today. I'd like to hand over the floor now to our speaker, Teddy, who's the president of the ICCA Consortium, for some opening remarks. Teddy, you.
Thank you, Tracy. Let me start by saying that this forum is about trying to convince the world to listen, and not just to listen, but also to learn from indigenous peoples on how to protect the remaining biodiversity of our planet, as well as what are the nature-based solutions that indigenous peoples can offer to stop climate change. But why should we listen to indigenous peoples? Most IPs are marginalized, threatened. Most of us live in the fringes, in remote areas, in mountainous regions, in small islands, deep within the forests. But this is also where you find most of the planet's remaining biodiversity. In fact, around 80% of the biodiversity of our planet are protected by indigenous peoples. For instance, in my country, in the Philippines, there are images of maps showing where the key biodiversity areas are, and then maps of critical watersheds, as well as maps of ancestor domains of indigenous peoples. And if you superimpose all of these three maps, it's mostly in one area and one territory. That's why for my organization, the Global ICCA Consortium, we have evidence that show that around 17%, potentially, 17% of the Earth's land territory are actually being protected now by indigenous peoples. And let me include in local communities, so not just indigenous peoples, but also local communities. Especially considering that the CBD framework, the new biodiversity framework from the Convention of Biodiversity, aims to have 30% of all land and marine areas to be conserved. Right now, it stands at 14% for governments as well as private conserved areas. But if you add the 17% from indigenous peoples and local communities, then that already meets the targets. No? But what can we learn from indigenous peoples? No? For me, it starts with the development mindset and also the governance of IPs. No? For instance, when I was governor of my state, I'm a politician, by the way, and so I was asking one of my constituents who was an indigenous elder, what should be the development mission of the province of my state? No? And he said it should be, quote unquote, to protect the earth and prepare it for the next generation. So that's how indigenous peoples think. And from that viewpoint, we come to governance, because IPs have governance systems that have been there, been practiced for decades, for centuries even. And this governance is collective in nature. We do have our chiefs, our councils of elders, but when the decision is about the well-being of the community, then it's collectively done. It's also consensus building, so that's democracy of indigenous peoples. It's something that we can teach the world. Our democracy is trying to build consensus instead of having democracy too politically divisive, as it's what's happening now. And it's rooted in spirituality. Much of the indigenous knowledge systems and practices of IPs revolve around natural resource management, about understanding nature. And this is why it is inherent for many indigenous peoples to be protectors of the environment, because that is our culture, that is who we are. For example, we have forest restoration, which I think is a very vital climate adaptation and climate mitigation measure. For indigenous peoples, that's not a project, that's not a target, that's what we do, it's our way of life. We plant trees. And what we plant are native species, not the plantation type reforestation projects that government usually does. No? Our agriculture is also very organic. And finally, our development philosophy is to use only what we need and not what we want. And to me, I think that is the biggest lesson that we can learn from indigenous peoples. Thank you.
Thank you, Teddy, for those very inspiring and insightful remarks. Indeed, I think we have a lot to learn from the worldview and perspectives, the long-term thinking of indigenous peoples in protecting nature's resources and biodiversity. So thank you for those thoughts. To get our discussion started, I'd like to start off with a round of questions for our panelists today. So I'd like to pose the same question to all of you. Maybe we can start from the end and work back. So Hang Dal, maybe you can describe a little bit about the context of Myanmar and what you are doing locally that contributes to meeting national or global climate change targets. And just, sorry, my microphone, just to mention that even though there are some venue challenges today, we do have 60 participants online, so it's great to see that we have a strong online presence, so thanks for that. So over to you, Hang Dal.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy. It's been an honor for me to represent our CSO representatives, and currently in Myanmar, the climate change, the impacts that the indigenous people and local communities are the most vulnerable in terms of the areas that they are living in, and as part of the climate actions, the implementations of the NDC is a standstill, that there's no implementation on ground, and with the current situations, the climate change impact is more severe, and the challenges they have been facing is getting worse. So in terms of the communities, the things that we do and support the community organizations, CSO, CBSO, is that to support the awareness and the climate, that they should initiate, that they should aware and communicate with the local communities, that to develop a local climate action plan, so that it will also not only raise their voices, but also to adapt and engage their traditional knowledge and practices, and also that to set their local levels climate targets, so that they can also involve more in these climate actions. They can also value their own actions, and it would also help them to mitigate and also adapt this climate change impact. And I believe that since COP26, 27s, the roles of these indigenous peoples and local community has been more realized by these climate actors. So there are also several climate actors, international organizations, NGOs, those are supporting local communities in Myanmar. And for now is that we trying to build coalitions of these climate actors to work together and support the local communities on all the climate actions in Myanmar altogether. So I believe that is, with the participations, the inclusiveness of these local communities, indigenous peoples, would really helpful to address these climate change issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Hang Dal, for really highlighting the importance of engaging with local communities in informing national or policy level strategies of climate mitigation and adaptation in Myanmar. It's so important. Tala, can I hand you the floor for the same question?
My name is Talisia Mbaravi, and I come from a small island of Kavewa Island in the northern part of Fiji. And it's around, the land area is around 19.32 square kilometers, and it's located near the GSR, or the Great Sea Reef. And we are heavily dependent on our ocean resources. With our Dangmewai Women's Club, we have worked with our local partners and stakeholders in setting up a home biogas system initiative, which converts green waste into fuel and also reduce our dependency on firewood. There's also a product which is biofertilizer that helps in our backyard gardening. Since Kavewa Island is a small island place, like a waste, like you just go out in the sea, and on the ocean, then we go again for our survival, for our food, So these are some of the initiatives that we are participating in as a Tangmewe Women's Club in Aka.
Great to hear, Tale, of the very local level solutions to adapt and mitigate to climate change with biogas and biofilter fertilizers. Teddy, would you like to answer this question? And then maybe I might see if our colleagues from Myanmar who have just joined would like to complement.
Yeah, I just like to add that I think the greatest contribution of Filipino indigenous peoples is really protecting our remaining watersheds. The Philippines used to have 70% forest cover. Now it's down to 20%. And as I've mentioned, most of these are in indigenous peoples areas. No? What's happening right now in the Philippines is that the IPs are starting to learn more about their rights under the international treaties as well as national laws, because we have national laws that supposedly protects or delineates and recognizes ancestral domains. And now they're starting to push back. That's also the reason why many of them are also being killed, imprisoned, or branded as terrorists. Because now that they're learning more about their rights, we're also trying to organize ourselves as a strong political constituency, because I think that's important. 10% of the country are indigenous peoples. But in terms of political power, it's still very minimal. And I think for us to be able to fight for policy reforms, especially with regards to climate change mitigation, we need to strengthen ourselves as a political constituency. So that's what's happening now in the Philippines. We're starting to push back. Thank you.
Great to hear that aside from the national level action, that there's also political movement from indigenous peoples in trying to push forward the much needed actions. April or Hladao, actually, if I can just introduce our speakers, because they just arrived. I'd just like to introduce Hladoi, who is an advocacy program manager at the Healthy Livelihood Association in Myanmar, which is an association of civil society organizations, and he's attending as a Kachin representative. So great that you could make it. And also, I'd like to introduce April Chuchu, who is the director of Save the Natural Resources, or SANAR, which is another local civil society organization from Myanmar, and he's attending as a Shan representative. So I don't know if either one of you would be able to complement the first question on, on what you're doing locally that contributes to meeting national or global targets.
Hello? Okay. Yeah. As climate change has happened, we are also struggling. Okay, so this is Ladwe. I work as a program manager focusing on advocacy in the organization called Healthy Livelihood Associations of Myanmar. So before I share my experience that, I would like to express and share very brief about the background of our country, Myanmar. And as a country, rich in natural resources and indigenous culture is one of the least developed country in Asia. Moreover, our country prone to climate change impact and natural disaster by being one of the most affected country in the world by the negative effect of climate change. For instance, the country faced with Cyclone Nagit in 2008, which killed more than 130,000 people. And additionally, heat wave occurred in 2010 and large floods in 2015, which have a disastrous impact on people living in the country and impacting our economy very seriously. And in addition, the rise of the sea level, sanitations, water resources, and farmland, and increased temperatures are seriously affecting the livelihood and income and agriculture of our country. For the delta area to the mountain to the north, the climate change threatens the life of Myanmar and its development. And unfortunately, since 2021, our country has experienced the most unique political situation at the moment. So to say that our country is experiencing not only the impact of climate change, but also the decrease of economy and the conflicts between the different power holder and authority. So at this moment, our country it's in the area of challenging not only the climate change but also the social issue. Thank you.
Yes. I'm April Juju. I'm based in Shan State, called SANA, Save the Natural Resource. We mainly focus on the natural resource management and the empowering to the community in Myanmar. Like for the Shan State is like the most conflict areas in Myanmar, not only the armed conflict, but also the land grabbing and also the forestry area that identified by the government without any consent from the local communities. So like what we have been doing is like that we are contributing to the NDCs or not. What we are trying to do is try to protect ourselves, and also I hope it will indirectly or directly contributing to the NDC. What we are doing is like we are enhancing and also supporting to the community. Like we are not the people who bring capacities and given to the community. We are the people who bring the technique, just only the technique, how to reach to the global, how to reach to the national level in the policy level. But the rest of the knowledge is already have been existence in the community. What we are doing is we are trying to find it out, such their practice, like customary practice. What kind of customary practice do they have, and also what kind of indigenous knowledge they already have been existing in it, and also how it is very valuable before the time. Like there is no increase of the climate change, and also how it will directly and indirectly contribute to the climate changes. And in this situation, I would like to highlight about is like we are helping to the community to make document by themselves, and also try to make recognize and also protection by themselves. That is what we have been through in Shan State, and also like there's a various kinds of policies and law that are not in line or that are not much with the local community in which. So what we are trying to do is like community is documented, and also they are trying to review it, and also the knowledge holder, how they have been practiced with natural friendly with their resources and how they manage it. That's the part one. Another one is like as a matrix is like what is the woman participation and decision making in the natural resource management, and also the indigenous practice. What is the strength and what is the weakness to the woman, and also how they become to reach to the decision making level that were contributing to the climate changes, and also how it will affect it to the. That is what we have been trying to do in our state. Like we are not a savior to the community. We are just a supporter to the community to emphasize what they have been existing in. Thank you.
Did you have something further you wanted to add? Sorry.
Yeah, I would like to add something more is what we are doing at the moment, right? So as I already mentioned, our country is facing the unique situation. We cannot, we don't have an answer for many problems. But what we can do is to do something at the community level. What we are trying to do is to promote and to strengthen the resilience of the community. The way we understand the resilience is having something to eat. If you have food, you are resilient. In this kind of very tough situation, the main and the most important thing is to have food to eat. So that's why we encourage our indigenous community to revise and rethink about the way of living based on their traditional knowledge. And the place the indigenous people live in they have the very blessing for the soil, so they can grow whatever they want, and we try to encourage to grow something at any time. So we encourage them. We organize kind of workshop, sharing of the knowledge, how to plant the tree, how to do the cultivations, and how to take care of the pets for the food security. That's what we are trying to encourage to the indigenous community in Myanmar.
No, thank you both for really highlighting the vulnerabilities and the really amazing challenges that are underway socioeconomically, and also the solutions that are there at the local level to support, for example, including women in decision making, but also environmental management and as stewards of the areas where you live. So thank you very much for highlighting that. Just to mention that we have over 70 participants online and a list of questions. So I want to move to our next round so that we have time to answer the questions we have from our audience as well. So just to get to our second question, maybe I can start with you, Teddy, and ask, how have Indigenous peoples in your context been involved in the development or implementation of nationally determined contributions?
Involvement? I really don't recall any concrete action from the government to consult with indigenous peoples on the NDCs. In fact, to be honest, the general public in the Philippines know little about NDCs. I mean, we hear about climate change, but it's not among the priorities of my countrymen, and that's a big problem. We know about climate change, but we don't know what's the government response, which is highlighted by the NDCs. No? In principle, the government does consultations with civil society organizations. That's where some indigenous peoples are represented. But the most vulnerable sector when it comes to climate change, the IEPs are rarely consulted by government when it comes to NDCs, and that's really an irony because we are there where the things are happening of the impacts of climate change. We are in the small islands which are vulnerable to the rise of sea levels. We are in the mountains where there's a lot of deforestation, but yet we are rarely consulted on this. Yeah.
Thank you, Ted. Thank you for highlighting this situation, and I hope that there can be openings in the future to really recognize the importance and value of Indigenous people's knowledge. They have important solutions to offer in this space. Tale, could I ask you the same question?
Okay, so apart from the home biogas system initiative that we have already also established our community network of protected areas, which included protecting small turtle nesting side islands, the coral reefs and mangroves as part of our initiative towards saving these turtles, which is our traditional icon for our Fijian culture, and at the same time for food security and our livelihood. So these are some of the initiatives that we're working at community level, and to address adaptation and mitigation as part of our climate actions. We would like to work very closely with the government and other partners to capture our efforts and ensure that we are recognized and effectively contributing to Fiji's national determined contribution and targets. We have recently just participated at the National Symposium for Community-Led Initiatives on Sustainable Development. And one of the key lessons from this symposium, which is captured under the Kauai communique, is that we as grassroots communities reaffirm our commitment towards implementation of Fiji's obligations under various global frameworks such as the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the Paris Agreement, and the Biodiversity Framework, and others through our efforts on the ground. We call on the government leaders to enhance current platforms and explore additional means through which communities can voice our priorities and share data and best practices that can inform crucial policy and legislative changes specifically on food security, clean energy, and urban solutions. Vinaka.
Thank you, Tele. It's great to hear that there's at least some coherence and consistency between the alignment of national views and in terms of the Paris Agreement and the international commitments, and also the actions that you're taking on the ground. And hopefully there can be further complementarity and strengthening in these areas. April or Hlada, would you like to answer this question?
So, in terms of NDC, as you already know that after Paris Agreement is COP21, so we have initially nationally determined contributions. So what we see, the INDCs is very important stuff as a globally to mitigate the climate change, very unique in our human history. So we see that this is very important, and it is not the top-down approach. It is bottom-up approach. As it already said that it is contributions, not you must do. It's contribution. So, like other country, our Myanmar country government delegates, they have the commitments as an initial and the NDC. So since then, we trying to do awareness raising to our civil society organization, community leader, and the government entity. But because it is the international and also linked with to the national level, and we as our country at the time is a developing country, so the government have to focus on many other. That's why we feel the gaps of awareness raisings of the INDC. So after 5 years, we have a discussion to submit the NDC. So there are a series of civil society engagement to give comment to the NDC of our country, but it has stopped when we faced the unique political situations in 2021. So nowadays the NDC is being trying to implement by the different entity. So our position is very clear that whoever to trying to implement the NDC, it should respect. They should respect the social issue. They should respect the rights of indigenous people. And when I have experienced that we sharing the awareness raising of the NDC, one of the community leader, he approached me and told me that, why are you telling me this one? Why are you not telling and why are you not approaching to the people who are living in the urban area, who are really involved in emitting the carbon dioxide? We are not emitting the carbon dioxide as an indigenous people. So I was shocked at the time. So, however, what I answered to him, of course, whatever do the emission, we all have the same responsibility to reduce the emission of carbon dioxide. As you are indigenous people and leader, you have the forest, so you can conserve and protect your forest by protecting the forest. Is you are contributing to the mitigations of the climate change. Of course, the people who are living in the urban area, they have the obligations to reduce the emission by the good way of living. And of course, the government has the responsibility to enact the legal framework to emit and to limit the emissions. And of course, the businessman has the responsibility to reduce the emissions of carbon dioxide by their economic activity. We all have a different responsibility, and we can contribute to the shape of the good and better place for the world. Yeah, what we are doing is like that. Yeah.
Thank you, April. Would you like to compliment?
Okay. Yes. For the NDC is like is generally is good, like coming from the but at the policy level and the implementation level, and also the like there's a really big gap at the governmental level and the community level. That's like, and also the perspective and the definitions on the every articles or every single word included in it is different based on the stakeholder. Like the government, they have their own interests and they have their own definition, even trying to make it sometimes make it manipulated. But for me, in Myanmar, whatever the communities are the people indeed who suffer in the climate changes, whatever the policy is talking about, and also like the numbers, the indicators, the report seems like skyrocketing, and also like it seems like good on the report, but the real situation is suffering by the community. So like what I believe is like letting to lead the indigenous peoples of the community that will lead to support to the climate changes. And also, like they already have been practice customary knowledge. Alongside with the climate changes, they have been adapted how to survive in their community. But at the same time, how they can reveal their customary practice and also the indigenous knowledge hand over by themselves. So that's why in this way, I would like to point it out, and also I'm supposed to what that Teddy said. At the governmental and policy level, there's some gap with what is really happening in the community. That's why we are really supporting to the community, particularly to the indigenous people. And also, like this conference title, we will do this to indigenous people, leading climate resilience and natural preservation. Yeah. This is true. Let them lead to the indigenous people, whatever they do. We just only need to document it and also to become a report that set by the global level. And also they were contributing for the changes and resilience of the climate change in the ground situation. Thank you.
Thanks very much. We have a really a very active audience online. So rather than trying to get all of the questions in the next 15 minutes, maybe I'll start, and maybe if one or two of you have reflections that you can offer, we can see how many questions we get through. But I'm going to just choose from the beginning. Maybe someone would have some thoughts on the first question. So this is, have the panelists seen any marked differences in the effort to more meaningfully include Indigenous peoples in climate action over the past decade? If so, what has the main difference been? So anyone would like to?
Is asking me to start, okay. Well, at least in international conferences such as this, now indigenous peoples are invited, are being asked to speak and talk about our experiences, our best practices. No? At least with the CBD, you have a very strong indigenous peoples contingent. And I think in terms of the language of the Convention of Biodiversity, indigenous community conserved areas, no, which are classified as other effective conservation measures, is there in the document. Although we would like to make it the norm and the standard, but we're still working on getting more recognition, not just in the international level, but even in the national level. Because I think this is where the conflict is, you know. it's really all about recognizing in the laws, in our national laws, that there are indigenous peoples, whether it's from Myanmar or Fiji or in the Philippines, and they have ancestral domains and territories, and they have the right to self-determination in these ancestral domains, the right to protect their nature and environment. That has always been the big debate, and I think right now, at least in the international level, this is being recognized, and this is being strengthened in some way, in some language. But the challenge now is, how do you now get the countries who are all part of these international conferences to really pass laws that also recognize in their own countries these ancestral domains and the governance of the indigenous peoples over these ancestral domains? No?
Thanks, Teddy. And in the climate change space, I think further to the CBD, there we do have the facilitative working group for the local communities, Indigenous Peoples Platform, and I think the work ongoing there is really exciting. Does anybody else have a response?
Yeah, so what we are talking about LCIP, local community and indigenous people, those terminology has the very unique meaning. Why there is local community and why there is indigenous people? Actually, indigenous people and local community are not the same. Indigenous people have been living in their ancestral land for thousands of years. Local community just came to the area for 10 or 5 years. I remember that when I engaged in the biodiversity conservation and protected area by rule in 2018, we have a consultation that the state trying to mix them, the two language, local community and indigenous, but they want to combine it. Actually, it's not the proper way to combine those language together. And now in COPs, we have global indigenous people platform that's discussing and debating is indigenous people are not the local community. The language are not the same. And it is obvious that the one who protect the land are indigenous people. Sometimes the local community who are the new to the land trying to sell based on the state statutory law is not the proper way. So before I came here, we organized a workshop to recommend the whoever authority trying to implement NDC some key point. So I would like to share that the key point. That workshop was supported by the WWF Myanmar. So whoever trying to implement the NDC should follow the rights of indigenous people, which is the basis principle, which is that free, prior, and informed consents, and respect the customary knowledge, practice, and land tenure. And in terms of the technology, whatever the state or whatever the businessman trying to mitigate the climate change, they shouldn't use the outdated technology and the equipment. If not, those are not sustainable. And it should be the strong grievance mechanism. We cannot know what happened at the indigenous community because of the mismanagement and misinvestment. They should have the strong grievance mechanisms. And of course, for the overall, whoever trying to implement and whoever do the NDC implementation, they should respect the United Nations framework, United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and also the International Human Rights Mechanism for everything and everyone, and for every activity they are trying to implement at the national and local level. Yeah, thank you.
No, thank you for highlighting the discussions that I hope can stimulate further thought on the role of Indigenous peoples and local communities. It's important to have that discussion and also the importance of EPIC and UN DRIP. So thank you for that. We have a number of questions online. I don't want to forget that we have an in-person audience as well. So maybe I can ask one more question from our online audience that are over 70 in number. And maybe if there are any from the floor as well, I can turn to you after. So maybe just to choose one more question from online. Do the participants here have any recommendations on how to promote strong involvement of women and youth in the ICCA or in conservation efforts? Sorry, just to reiterate the question, are there any recommendations to promote strong involvement of women and youth in the ICCA and in conservation?
Yeah, just start by saying that, one of the conflicts that I've experienced as an Indigenous leader and as president of the ICCA is while we promote Indigenous governance is also, by tradition, very patriarchal and also very elderly. But I always tell my brothers and sisters that culture evolves, And so while culture is in many Indigenous communities is very patriarchal, their councils are very old, but it evolves. And so right now, we're really trying to highlight, at least in the ICCA consortium, the importance of listening to voices from the young as well as from women. So I think that is a very important program or advocacy that we have among Indigenous peoples to try to change, not to change culture, but try to make sure that while culture is evolving, we will ensure that more voices from women and young are heard in Indigenous communities. No?
Thanks for that. And just to clarify, I think in this case, ICCA refers to Indigenous Community Conserved Areas.
Well, actually, the exact word is Indigenous peoples and local communities, because as Helai mentioned, we say that our IPs and local communities were involved in conservation, so ICCA. And that's why even in our governance in the ICCA, we have a specific thematic committee on the young people, as well as a thematic committee on women. And to tell you, initially, there were those who were opposing the gender policy of the ICCA because they were saying it was a Western imposed value. And so we had to say, this is also part of our values as Indigenous peoples. And we're not trying to change culture, as I've said. But one elder was telling me, culture evolves. The thing that you see now is not exactly the same that we have centuries ago. So it evolves. So now I think that's the kind of mindset we're trying to promote, that we have more voices from women and the young people, in the ICC at least.
Talai, would you like to answer?
Okay, I'll just talk about my personal experience as a youth and a woman in conservation. For me, it was when I started it was through my childhood, growing up. We started as a conservation first because most of our traditional knowledge is passed on, what Daddy said, conserving our biodiversity at a very young age. And I think that was when the passion just started coming in, and also means of survival. I was thankful that WWF stepped in, and that's how my, my conservation efforts started from there. So when I started this journey, it was challenging, especially for Pacific culture, where women, they're not recognized, especially in decision-making spaces. And as also a youth, sometimes I'm told that, you are young. You're not, we have been here for the past how many years, but it's, it's not about us, but for our next generation. It's, it's ingrained in us that we look after our next generation. So when I started coming into this space, conservation space, the positive indicator for me was the youth and the women, they started, they started, how can we participate? How can we? So I think it takes someone to push through and for them just to, so yeah, I think that that's my personal experience. So I think, and also for the government to recognize these initiatives, for everybody, like, what MetroCard says, let's all work together. Not just, it's not about, our culture is evolving, but we have to keep on. So yeah, that's basically from my personal experience, Vinaka.
Thank you for sharing your personal experience, Tale. I can say as a sister also, I appreciate all your efforts. It's not always easy, but it's so important. And in English, they have some phrase, the youth is wasted on the young, but in fact, the youth is not wasted on the young, and you have to carry us forward and bring the solutions to these big problems. So if I can offer the floor, any last questions before we close for today? I think we have one question from the audience.
Hello, I just want to say thank you to all of the panel. I have a question that could be directed to any or all of you. I just wanted to know if you could tell us about what's the most pressing issue from climate change that's facing your country today.
Yeah, I will start. As I already mentioned, is even though our country Myanmar is very prone to the climate change consequence, we experience almost all of the climate change issue. We face the flood, we face the and even rainfall, we face the drought. So that's why we need the support from the international community. The most important thing is not only the climate change issue, but also the man-made disaster we are facing now as a country, Myanmar. So even there are many other countries who only face the nature disaster, but we also face the man-made disaster. That's why the more support we need at the moment. Thank you very much.
Hello. Yes. For example, when I fly from Rangoon to Dubai, I thought Dubai would be terribly hot, but I'm amazed that in Rangoon it's 32 degree or 34 degree. Here is 30 degree. It's more cooler than So like the climate change that have been facing is more significant. Like before the coup and after the coup, whatever it is, like we don't get very less support from the international front. For example, Bangladesh is the most impacted by the climate change, and also they got a lot of support from the international. But Myanmar is the second one, but they don't get very less because of the COVID, because of the coup political situation. Yeah. So like another one is, as he mentioned, the man-made disaster, and like because of the conflicts and there's a huge of internal displays. Relatively with the internet displays, there's some deforestations and the other things, and also at the same time, because under the conflict, there's a lot of opportunists who log in lots of forests and also making benefit from it. So like the climate changes in Myanmar is more challenging than the ever for, and also it will be getting worse in the future. Whatever like recently the government is trying to promote about they are recycling the battery for the EV or something like that, and also renewable energies. Whatever they are talking about is just only on the report. They are just a paper tiger. But in the real situation, the communities and also the peoples are facing like, oh, we cannot predict there will be drought or there will be rain or flood or whatever that we cannot predict. So consequently, it's embedded to the livelihoods and the other things. Yeah, thank you.
For us, there's a lot of issues, but I think it's for the government that needs to scale up as local governments, like to scale up our indigenous rights and climate actions, because and also to talk with local, indigenous people, because we are the traditional custodians of our biodiversity. And they need to talk more, and because a lot of times they say that traditional knowledge is important on all of this, but they are not actually implementing it. So I think it's time for systematic change in legislation and policies, where we as indigenous people can effectively contribute in national and regional level, and policy space as well. So I think that's one of the pressing issues that we face right now. Like I said, like our fellow from Nema said, there's a gap somewhere between the indigenous and our respective governments. Vinaka.
Okay, I will say one word: extractives. That's really a big challenge for us. We are the top 5 most mineralized country in the world. Many of these mining applications are in ancestral domains. So a lot of the opposition to these extractives come from indigenous peoples. So I think that to me is a big challenge, because it's a government policy to promote mining, but at the same time we have indigenous people saying, no, we want to preserve our culture, our nature and environment. So that's, at least for us at IPs, it's a big challenge.
Thanks. There's way more that needs to be said about this topic that we can cover in an hour. So I really appreciate all the questions, and even the ones online that we haven't had a chance to get to. Hopefully there will be opportunity to get to those also in the future. I really appreciated the very insightful and informative remarks from our speakers. So I hope that our audience today in person and online also have been able to take something from the discussions. And I encourage you all to take everything that we've heard today into your work moving forward. I know for the People Protecting Landscapes and Seascapes initiative, of which many of you are part of in the respective countries, and thank you also for mentioning WWF, where we are also doing some of this work, that we can take some of these lessons in our work going forward. Just before closing, I just want to mention that there will be other opportunities today to hear about Indigenous leadership. Teddy will join us at a press conference in Press Conference Room 2 at 12:30. And we'll also have leadership from Latin America and Africa at that press conference. We also have at the pavilion later today from 3:30 to 8:30 a dialogue on the future of COPs, which will include a range of insights from community perspectives, but also government and corporate perspectives. So do feel free to join us for those. And in closing, thank you all for joining today.